Afternoon, everyone. Later afternoon for some and earlier for others, depending where we find you today. My name is Leah Nord. I'm one of the policy directors here at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I work in the area of workforce strategies and inclusive growth, and I'm very, very delighted to be moderating the panel today. I'm going to introduce our speakers here shortly. I'm going to invite our president and CEO to make some opening remarks. Then our panelists will make some brief remarks here as well. And then we will open the floor to discussion for the rest or hopefully the bulk of the webinar. We know there's been a lot of interest and a lot of questions in this topic this afternoon, which is ensuring the recovery and resilience of Canada's food service sector. We have a very distinguished panel this afternoon, and as I introduce you folks, maybe you can just wave to so indicate yourself. We have Fred Landtmeters, who is the president of Molson Coors Canada, here this afternoon. And Fred, thank you very much. We've got a whole host of sponsors on our Resilience Network, but Molson Coors is sponsoring this webinar this afternoon. Fred is joined by Jim Treliving, who is the president and CEO of Boston Pizza, who I did see here at one point. As well, we also have Larry Issacs, who is the president of Firkin Group. So having said that, I'm going to hand it over to Perrin. Perrin, are you there?
Leah, yes, I am.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay. Perrin, good afternoon. I'll invite you to make some opening remarks.
Glad to do that. And thanks, Leah, very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And particularly, Jim, thank you for joining the panel today on your birthday. I realize it's not one of those traumatic ones with a zero, but nonetheless, it's above and beyond the call of duty that you should be joining us today. And we're delighted to have you. This is a sector that's particularly important to Canadians. Over 1.3 million Canadians worked in the accommodation and food service industry in 2019. And the contribution that's made by the sector amounts to about 2.3% of Canada's GDP, which is enormous. And according to the Canadian Survey of Business Conditions, which we did in conjunction with Statistics Canada, almost 1/4 of the businesses in the sector reported significant disruptions to their supply chains, with about 3/4 reporting major cancellations in their services. And according to the CSBC, over 1/3 have voluntarily closed their doors, and almost half are required to close by the government. So the impact is enormous. And it means that this is a sector to which we have to give an enormous amount of attention. It goes without saying that we're in unprecedented times. And when we talk about getting back to normal, that may be a misnomer. Just as the way that 9/11 changed the way in which we did business and changed the way in which we operated in society, I think what we'll be finding that is the pandemic will be doing exactly the same. And indeed, the effects may be even longer lasting and more widespread than in the case of 9/11. It's clear that getting to anything that even constitutes a new normal will take time, particularly until sometimes we have a vaccine which will make people feel safer about going out. Now, usually in a recession, what you find is those countries or sectors which are first in are usually the first ones out as well. However, that's not the case today. And what we have when we take a look at travel, tourism, entertainment, hospitality, and all of the businesses that are associated with them, is that these were the sectors that were hit first by the recession, and they're the hardest hit today. And it's quite likely that this will be the sector which is last to come out as well. That means then that when the government, for example, looks at programs like they announced yesterday for bridge financing, well, for bridge financing programs, just like for concrete bridges, you need to know that there's something solid on both shores. In this case, it's very hard to see the far shore. And a good deal of time is going to have to pass on that. And it means that all of us, whether in the sector or in government or elsewhere, have a very real interest in doing what we can to ensure the success of the sector and the ability of businesses to continue. And that challenge is particularly great because, as we know from the sector, it's one where there aren't large margins, and where, as a result, then there's not enormous cash reserves there backing these companies, enabling them to see through tough times. And as a result, then they need whatever help can be provided. And particularly if we're looking at social distancing requirements going on for the indeterminate future, it's very hard if you take a restaurant, for example, where margins were thin before, to take out half of the seats from it and to see what the business plan is that will allow people to be profitable. Now, I'm struck by the capacity and the creativity of so many in the sector. It's amazing to me to see how many people have turned on a dime. They've reinvented their businesses and added new ways of doing businesses. But it remains enormously challenging. And given the importance of the sector in terms of jobs, in terms of the percentage of the GDP and the benefits, and how they're spread through every single region of Canada, I think it's very much in our interest to work together. And today's webinar is very much about an opportunity for us to talk about how all of us, wherever we are on the pyramid of prosperity, can work together. It's a sector of incredible diversity, yet at the end of the day, the interests are complementary. We succeed if the whole of the sector succeeds, all of the portions of it will succeed as well. And each of you today brings a different perspective and a different expertise to the discussion, which will help us to construct a really integrated and constructive strategy. And for our part, the Canadian Chamber will use our power to convene, to bring people together, and our power to persuade, to reach out to the public and to governments to explain to them the importance of this sector, and to encourage people to work together for success, so that Canadians can understand why it's so important that we act together. And I would close off simply by saying the Canadian Chamber will be here with you throughout all of this to assist you and to provide help in any possible way that we can. I'll stop there, Leah. I'm greatly looking forward to hearing our panel and hearing responses to the questions as well. But it's an important day. This is a very important sector for Canada, and I greatly appreciate everybody coming together.
Thank you very much, Perrin, and I really do think that set the scene, very well from, where I sit on the, from the workforce perspective. If we look at the labor force numbers, this was the sector, government stats tied in with accommodation, but from week one, this was the hardest sector hit. Now in February and between March and April, 50% of the jobs have been lost in this sector. So it is really significant, and it's so important to have this conversation today. And I'm wondering, Fred, I'm going to invite you first. We've welcomed you all, just to make some, observations and opening remarks. Fred, if you wanted to start, that would be great.
Absolutely, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to be here with you today to discuss the future of the food service industry. And I'm also proud to say it's the topic that we have chosen to kick off our new partnership between Molson and the Chamber. So it was meant as a statement from our side to indicate how important the industry is to us here at Molson. But I also wanted to recognize your choice, Perrin, to be present and to show your and the Chamber's support to all of us here today. So thank you for that. I know that all of you have probably figured it out already, but I think it is good to remind ourselves that redefining the future of the food service industry is most likely going to be synonymous to earning and rebuilding the trust of your customers. For me, the word is really trust. And I'll repeat it a few more times. I won't apologize for that, because the alarm bells went off in my head when I heard that a minimum of 30% of your customers may have decided already that they won't come back through the door when you reopen. And we all know what that means for our P&Ls. We also know that earning and rebuilding that trust will take time. So the reopening and rebuilding of this industry is going to be a long-term play. I think many of us know that, but I also believe it is important that other stakeholders, including all levels of government, understand that. Which leads me to the point I really wanted to land today, which is that I believe we need to stand united. We need to have one voice as an industry, and we need to formulate clear, long-term asks to the government. I've personally heard provincial, federal government stakeholders asking the question loud and clear. They want to understand what we need. But if I can be a tad critical, I think the food service industry has an opportunity to catch up on other industries on the clarity of our asks and on the way we deliver the asks as one voice. We at Molson are happy to help where we can, and really for me the objective for today is to listen to all of you to see what are the messages that we can relay to the government stakeholders that we're talking to as they are trying to shape their recovery plans. So that's where I wanted to leave it, and really looking forward to this session.
Thank you very much, Fred. And Jim, are you there? Not used to this platform. Go ahead, please.
All right. I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. I made some notes here, so I'm going to be reading a bit of it. But our industry, which employs over 1.2 million Canadians, has been devastated by this disease and very uncertain future ahead. Estimates are over 800,000 Canadians in the hospitality are out of work, and most full-service restaurants are closed or barely open. This is a crisis affecting a huge number of Canadians. Just with our company alone, we laid off 24,000, almost 25,000 people in the first week of this shutdown. Our industry has been hit incredibly hard, and we need help. We need immediate and decisive actions by the governments to save the most and severely impacted sectors of the economy. And we need all these measures for all restaurants, chain operators, multi-unit operators, and independents. This is an issue about employment, reopening restaurants, and not about the size of the organization. And I think these are the biggest things that we got to look for is when we do this is in our I guess, national perspective. Just as COVID-19 had a varying impact in different regions throughout Canada, the reopening plans will be very drastically from province to province, including timelines, capability requirements, and health and safety precautions, especially with our staff and the people that are going to be working, how we take our guests in. As a national brand, we need to take a consistent approach from coast to coast to ensure number one priority is the health and safety of our guests and our employees. Consumers are no longer going to simply look for service and food quality as a determining factor of where they will choose to eat out. All of a sudden, health and safety has become a key decision, making this criteria for them. As a national brand, we are well equipped to ensure that we are putting all our organizations' resources behind these reopening initiatives and consulting and working with provincial governments as well as our franchisees who are in any of these communities across the country, from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island and the 2 territories that we're involved in. There's 1 territory we're not yet. When I say yet, we will be opening there. But as a national brand, we need to make sure our franchisees are equipped with all the stuff they need across the country. And that's the most piece that we have to work on for our guests, not only for a dining experience, but exceeding their expectations around health, safety, social distancing, guidelines, and cleanliness. That's where we're at. And I think our biggest thing now is to make sure that we get together, and as Fred said earlier, to be a voice with the federal government, the provincial government, and the local governments. I think they all have to be involved. It's just not one thing. So we've looked at this across for our people that run from anywhere from the employee wage subsidy, the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, and a lot of this stuff is being said, but we haven't seen a lot of it being done. Doing it is the other piece of this whole thing. Deferring payments on taxes owed to the federal government, including not but limited to GST and HST, corporate taxes. We are aligned with Restaurants Canada on their request to permanently waive Q1 2020 GST and HST. This should not be in a form of deferment. Make corporate meals and entertainment expenses 100% tax deductible to encourage support for our hospitality, food, and beverage companies. So those are the things I think we're looking at very seriously. And if we get to this, the next piece is the provincial municipal governments that we have to get to as well. A 6-month relief from the payment of commercial property taxes, water, sewer, and utilities, such as electricity and natural gas for restaurants. The temporary layoff of period in various provinces needs to be extended until further notice. Some governments have started to take these steps. Like other cities and states, we're looking into a cap on third-party delivery services fees. We've been charged, or every restaurant that's kept open has been charged up to 30% on delivering our food to customers, and that's wrong. It has to be lowered. Financial assistance with new legislated social distancing requirements, i.e. sanitizing stations, plexiglass, and floor stickers. This should be paid for. We should be able to get some financial assistance for all restaurants for that. So those are the points that I've made, and I can go on and on and on, but those are the things I feel is very strong across our organization that we have. And I've talked to our franchisees as of yesterday from coast to coast. I got a hold of, and I think I was only one person I didn't get a hold of in Ontario, and he's a big franchisee, or a good friend of mine. And we really all had a good conversation about this. And this is the notes that I made from what their speeches were. So thank you.
And thank you, Jim. We really appreciate that perspective, both from sort of, sitting at a national level, but also, all of the players, the provincial down to the individual franchisee in every community across the country. So
thank you.
Yeah, very, very well said, and with recommendations as well. And what I'll do now is turn the floor over to Larry. Larry, I'll invite you to speak, and I'm going to share my screen, everyone, here for a moment, because we've got a pyramid. So Larry, I'm going to share this, and you can speak to it as well.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and I apologize if I repeat a couple of the points that have been brought up already, as I had prepared my presentation already, but I wanted to introduce, I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle, and I'll explain to you why. I created this pyramid in discussing with a number of locations, some of our partners around the country, as to how and why we get ourselves back into the business and how we do this properly. And I created this pyramid called the precarious pyramid of prosperity. And the reason I called it the precarious pyramid of prosperity is because at the end of the day, the pyramid is only as good as the strength of the people that are on this pyramid and working together. So let me just introduce you to how I get to the pyramid and what's needed for us to get back to business. I'm sure by now everybody's aware the restaurant industry is in dire straits. And by default, there are a number of bankruptcies, and it needs an urgent resurrection. The pyramid is created specifically to collaborate and structure a plan to ensure the survival of our industry. As stated originally, we were one of the first industries to be mandated to completely shut down, and probably going to be very close to the last to reopen. We have yet to see any form of realistic roadmap to recovery. The financial assistance we've received so far has been extremely appreciated and needed, but unfortunately is a mere band-aid on the catastrophic injury that requires surgery. Operating at 100% occupancy, the restaurant industry realizes a mere 4 to 6% profitability. And I'll say this with respect, it is delusional to believe that anything less than 100% occupancy will be able to sustain the profitability of our industry. So where do we go from here? We're going to rely on the top of our pyramid to guide everybody to ensure that the pyramid stays alive. The government has the ability to save the industry now. We have to have a decisive action and a clear roadmap forward. It will make it achievable. It's going to come at a cost for sure. So long as the burden of this cost is not expected to be carried by the operator only, we have a chance of success. We know that the pendulum has swung heavily to online buying due to the stay-at-home order, and don't go outside or you could die. We also know that the customer confidence level to go to restaurants, bars, hotels, and airports are at a record-setting all-time low. Until the government and the world has created a vaccine and the government starts encouraging people to go back to their normal behavior, our industry will remain in a bankrupt situation. We need to be proactive and not reactive. We almost need to freeze time. Desperate times call for desperate action. What does this mean? In order to maintain the integrity and the structure of our pyramid, we need all levels equally invested in the financial well-being. All government taxes and utilities need to be frozen until the end of social distancing. All bank interest and loans need to be frozen until the end of social distancing. Cash injections are needed to be invested in the industry for lost inventory, payment to suppliers, helping assist the farmers, manufacturers, and distributors to bring everybody to a zero balance on opening day after social distancing is lifted. We need this assistance to get all the stores back open. And as Jim mentioned, we have to put up plexiglass and numerous things to get ourselves back into the game. This has to happen. For further legislation must be written to the insurance companies to have a participation without necessarily admitting fault through business interruption payment structures. Legislation has to be written to landlords, not negotiation, not offers to go and discuss with them. The only way this is going to make sense is for literally legislation to be written and percentage rent to be stipulated on percentage of the sales when we reopen. The landlords will feel slighted now for sure. However, as these leases expire, no one's going to be able to continue to pay the square footage rates that currently is accepted as market value, and the landlords in the long run will be worse off. The government has to assist with all supply chain. We're going to end up in a significant shortage of product and supplies as we all start to ramp up. Right now, the farmers and the suppliers are throwing product away because it has nowhere to go. We need the government assistance to ensure that we are not shorted product as we get ready to open. All of the points that I've brought up to you today have to be put into place to ensure the integrity of our pyramid. The operators will not be able to reopen if it doesn't work this way. It will be leaving millions of unemployed people, a trail of debt and despair, and impacting an entire collapse of the economy. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much to all three of you. I'm going to proceed with the questions. There's lots of them. They're coming in fast and furious here. And for those of you on the line who aren't familiar with this, once again, we do have the Slido app. It's in your invitation. If you please enter your questions there in the first instance, we'll go through those. I'm just going to jump into them here as well. And gentlemen, what I'll do is probably ask one of you to start and then the other two to comment accordingly. And I know you all come from different perspectives in the sector. So if I ask you a question and you would like to defer to another panelist, please feel free to do so. So Jim, I think I'll start with you and this first question that's come up. The question is, how have your motivated employees to come to work?
Well, I think most of it, like I said before, we're a franchise company across the country. So we have our owners that are in the communities. And when we've asked our staff, we've gone from about 35 to 45 people per restaurant down to 6 or 8. And that's what's working in the stores. And what they do is they make sure they're healthy, make sure they got the equipment to work with for the takeout and delivery stuff. We've been quite clear on it, and we had to get equipment for them, for their hands, for their faces, their masks, and so on and so forth. So we put all that in place, and that's what we're doing now.
Thank you. Larry, Frederic, would you like to add anything?
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, not necessarily in the sense that we run, well, a different type of operation, I would say, the breweries, the sales force, but I think that the principles are exactly the same. So we've tried to make sure that we provided all the equipment and we took all the precautionary measures that are required to give people a safe working environment. I think it comes back to the concept of trust. I think there was no way people would accept to go back to work if they wouldn't trust that we had their interests at the top of our priority list in these circumstances.
I follow suit on what the others have said. We are preparing a new program for our staff. We are writing policies of how they're going to manage themselves in front of house. We are getting all the PPE that we can. We are looking at hand stations as you arrive with sanitizing liquid, and we are creating the best safe environment possible for the customers to feel safe and secure coming back to our establishments.
Just to add to what Larry said on that, we've ordered thermometers for every store across the country so that we can check our staff coming to work, and also we'll be able to do that with their customers as well.
Great, thank you. And Fred, I'm going to send this next question to you in the first instance, because you've talked a lot about this trust piece and the importance for the consumer. The question is, of consumer confidence, governments do to support the industry and increase in consumer confidence?
Sorry, you got cut off a little bit, so I think the question was...
I'm sorry. It's a question about consumer confidence, Fred. It says, what can governments do to support the industry and increase consumer confidence?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and for me, it's probably a little bit the contradiction, almost the pressure from the industry to reopen as soon as possible versus I think the balance that the government needs to keep between not reopening too soon, which I think would be really detrimental to building that trust, building that confidence of consumers. I think my interpretation of what various levels of government have done so far have led to, and this is perception, it's not supported by too many facts, but to a higher degree of confidence that what the governments are doing in this country is probably leading to a higher degree of confidence than what we see in other jurisdictions, in particular in the United States, for example. So I think if they can continue to do that, if they continue to emphasize what they expect operators to do to create that safe environment for people to go back to, I think it's all about communication for me. And to the point that we made earlier, what are we doing to keep our employees safe? I think when you get to consumers and customers, it's doing is one thing, but I think is what are you saying you're doing to really boost that confidence, because ultimately if you're doing it but people don't know about it, I think that's where the government can play a role. What do they expect in terms of guardrails so that people know that the expectations are that there's a safe bubble that's created there?
Larry, you know, at the top of your pyramid was government, and I know you spoke to it. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I think obviously with everybody staying at home, there's been a huge big push to online purchasing. I think once we are getting ready to go back out, and once the environment is safe for everybody to be back and visiting all the locations again, I think it's almost crucial that the government uses the resources available to encourage people to go back and support the local businesses and to go out and visit the local hotels and travel again when everything is safe to do so. So I think they have the tools between radio and TV, they have the facilities to offer those messages, and I think right now they've offered us the message of what is safe and secure. They need to turn that message around when it's ready to do so.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, do you want to add anything to that as well?
I think the big thing too is that, you know, it's not all just government. We've got to get our act together as far as an organization as well, and make sure that we have a game plan for everything we're going to open. We're staff right now are working full blast 24/7 on an opening plan. Now we don't know what day that's going to happen or what week or what month, but we've got to have our stuff together too. And I think that's just, and I say this with not taken away from the government side of it, but we as a company have got to work on not depending on them as much as we think we should. I think it's part of it is getting the best stuff that we can get for our staff, and the best thing to show our people when you walk to the restaurant from the parking lot in. I want to make sure that there's people out there with masks. They come in, they show you, and you space yourself. No different than what we do in the beaches, or if you get a chance to go somewhere. I watched a few of the major retailers in the U.S. and Canada. I went to a huge retailer the other day, and they had people standing there with wipes and the whole thing. We got to do the same. We've got to be ready for all this. And part of that is, where do we get the money to do all that? And that's what we're talking about today. Some of it's going to come from government, and some of it has to come from within our organization as well.
Great, thank you. And that actually leads nicely into the next question. It's from Chris. Larry, I'll start with you on this one and have the others chime in. To all the panelists, do you believe that the CERB, which is the emergency relief benefit, will create an issue for business to rehire staff? What would you do?
Yes, we've had this discussion already in general, is that some of the staff are going to believe it's going to be more cost effective for themselves to stay home being supplied the CERB payment, and it will be challenging to bring staff back. But again, I think all of this goes back to a plan of legislation to get things going normally. I think at the end of the day, as much as people are happy to receive the money, I got to believe the reality is people do want to leave their homes. People want to get back to a real way of life. And I think it will be productive for everybody to get back to work. So yes, it will be a challenge early on, but I think it can be helped to make this make sense.
Jim, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the same thing as Larry's saying. I think you have to be ready for this, and you have to be ready, that they have to give us the guidelines that they're going to do. It's nice to hear that they're going to open, but what time and when? And we have to have our own plans. There's no question for my mind that in our organization across, we're building a plan right now, taking our franchisee. We're having our meetings like we're doing right now in this video today, that we're getting our people every day. What's the questions you need? What do we need to help to put the plan together to open? And I think we have to get that to the government and say, this is where we need help to do that. And that's what we're working on.
Absolutely. Fred, do you want to add anything, or?
Maybe just an observation based on our own experience at Molson. I mean, we had people who benefited from the CERB benefits. Some of them were called back to work. We were concerned that actually it would indeed be more attractive for people to stay at home on those benefits. So far, there is absolutely no evidence that that is the case. I think to Larry's point, it looks like people want to get out of their homes, and not just to go back to a bar or a restaurant, but also to go back to work. So it's relatively limited so far because it's quite recent, but we haven't seen any evidence of people preferring the benefits over getting back to work.
Great, and this isn't the next question, but I do see it down here, and I think I'm going to address it now because those are the benefits for the individuals. There's a question here about government benefits for businesses, for example, the wage subsidy, the CEBA and different things like that. Would you be able to speak to your experiences with them and what you've used and what you've done? Wanted to start with that. Used any of the government programs like the wage subsidy or?
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I think we have made limited usage of those, let's say, corporate enterprise benefits. I mean, the reality is also that we've been fortunate enough to be qualified as an essential business. So most of our breweries operations keep running. So I think these corporate benefit schemes, I don't think were really designed for us, and we haven't really tapped into them as much as maybe other organizations may have.
Great. Jim, do you have any comment about these government programs? I've got the question called up here now. It's wage subsidies or BCAP or any one of these acronyms. What's been your experience or those of your franchisees?
I think we got our first payments the last couple of days. But we've got to extend that out. This can't be just a one-shot deal. This has to be an extension, and that's what I'm saying to all our people, that we've got to keep the pressure on the government to say that this is just not a one-shot deal. And thank you very much for coming. We've got to have this out for an extended period of time, because we still don't know when we could open even a portion of our restaurants, never mind anything else. So yes, we did finally got some money for that. And what we're doing now is asking them to extend it further than what they have now.
So to extend it further, absolutely. Larry, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, yeah. I think everybody in the restaurant industry would have taken advantage of all the government programs at this point in time. And as I said initially, they have been helpful, but certainly are not enough to take us down the road. I think we have to be very, very careful not to be caught in a fake sense of security that this money is going to save the restaurant industry. Any deferral of monies that are owed, being it rent, loans, or any other monies that are going to crop up come January and February, will take down the restaurants, because there's not going to be enough revenue generated between now and then to catch up with deferrals. So we need to be very, very cautious of the loans that are coming into play on a deferred basis or a pay me later basis.
And this, again, sort of feeds in. We're bouncing around a bit, but I think it comes from, these issues come from a number of different angles. And I've, through the course, I'm just reading the next question over here, and it talks about, if you take a look at the reopening and recovery plans, you'll see officials talk about, it's not a switch that goes on and off, it's a dimmer, right? And the question of how it gets raised, and we don't, the last thing a lot of them have said, and I think we would agree, is that they don't want the businesses to open and have to, but what if you don't fully, and I know you've spoken to this, if there isn't 100% right away or ever again, how does business return to normal, quote unquote, in the absence of 100% occupancy? Larry, I'll ask you first.
Well, 100%, that is correct. The reality is, it is almost starting a brand new business when we reopen. So if you look at the actual business, we shut down hard on March the 16th. Most companies left 30-day suppliers unpaid. You're going to have to pay that to reopen. You're going to have to pay rent on the day that you open. You're going to have to buy new inventory on the day you reopen. You're going to have to put up all your perspex and get all your PPE and put all your stations in. So the reality is, you are basically investing in a brand new business on day one, with a potential of 50% allowance to open. And don't get lost in the 50% allowance to open, because we don't know what the customer confidence level is going to be yet. So even if we told we allowed 50% of opening space, doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to get the 50% of the customers coming in. Now, continuing on that initial investment, which you want to call reopening, but I say rebuilding, you now have the concern of, what are your bills for that month? Do we have a rent in place that is affordable? Can we afford to pay our insurance, our health insurance, hydro and gas? Because the reality is, if the numbers don't justify the opening, you're going to find in 3, 4, 5 months down the road, people are going to be closing again. So to Jim's point about the government assistance, and I'll go back to my original point, this has to be funded correctly from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, I'm going to ask you to jump in here, but I'm actually going to read a question that's a comment from Lee Porter, who's a BP franchisee, that builds on this and says, we have a real concern that opening on a 50% basis will actually be worse off than today, and the cost will exceed the benefit.
Yeah, and to answer Lee, I think he's got a good point. He's making a good point there. We're having concerns about that across the country, and we've talked about that. But I think we have to start somewhere. And to Larry's point, we have to start with some kind of we can't just massively say we're going to open and bring all our staff back in and bring all the stuff in that we thought we were doing when we closed the place. So I think, to answer Lee's point, I think there is going to be a bit of a problem, but I think it'll build, and I think we have to build. I got to remember that when I went through this recession years back, one of the things we found was when we thought we were going to do something and it didn't happen. We didn't have a plan, and I think the plan that you have to build is a big piece of how we open this thing. And I think we have to see where the customer is going to build. If we're going to use 50% to start with, some places are going to only use 25 or something. They're talking about just having, if you have a patio, you can open your patio. That's it. That's not going to make enough money to pay the bills. What it is, though, is going to get us the start to see where our customers are going to come from. And to Larry's point, I think we're opening brand new businesses. Now, we've been fortunate enough at Boston Pizza to be in a situation across the country that we have takeout and delivery. So we know that we've got product coming in. We know that we've got, we were delivering, we started the company 60 years ago, or I was there 56 years ago, and we were delivering man. We were making more, that was basically where we started, with a small dining room. So we know what we've learned through this recession is that we're going to see some different ways of doing business, completely different ways. So I think that that's the thing we have to build from. We maybe start with 10 or 15%, but we got to start somewhere.
Okay, and I do want to bring you in, Fred, but this question here, Jim, really nicely dovetails on that. So I'm going to ask you as a follow-up, because you did speak to this, and the question is, what has been your experience moving to online delivery programs in the crisis period? What does that model look like in the reopening and recovery period as well? It sounds like a little bit of everything, but I'll ask you to speak to that, and I'll bring the others in.
There's no question that's helped us to do some business and to keep the operation going. Does it make us any money? No. It's going to pay some of the bills. That's what we want to do.
Okay.
And what we looked at in this whole scenario was, with the franchising system that we have and how we do things across the country, it's given us a level of operating to get started. It's not the way we're going to finish. We've learned a whole bunch of new things with this pandemic, and if we don't learn something in this pandemic, then we're going to make a big mistake. And I think the biggest thing is that we have to Larry's point, you made a lot of great points of what we're talking about here, but we have to get back to operating what we're good at, and that's our business. And we got to follow that system that we had, and we're going to come up with new items, new ways of doing business. And I think that's going to be a big boon for us. I think it'll be, I can't be negative to that. I want to be positive. The customer is going to come out for the first little time. And I think because we all are so pent up right now, we're going to rush out, but then we're going to back off again. You remember that there's people that haven't got enough money to spend in restaurants. I mean, you think about this, the day, one of the biggest things I saw we're not going to, are you going to have corporate cards going out to pay your American Visa or American Express or whatever and turn that into your company? No, you're not going to get that. So there's going to be a lot of ways how we're doing. Right now, we're not dealing with cash at all. So that was probably an eighth of our business before. And I look at all the different bills you're going to have to look at and the way of you doing business, how you pay your bill and so on. It's all by card now, and we're changing stuff. So there's a lot of stages coming.
Mm-hmm. And Fred, I know you sit from a different perspective, but from your view and working with different companies and operators, what has been your experience?
So I think Jim probably just went to the core of what I wanted to add here, which is I think the part about doing business differently. I know a P&L for an operator doesn't work at 50% capacity, and I know the focus is going to be about rebuilding that to 100%. But I think I also have a belief that the innovators are going to win after we're going to go through this, and there's going to be operators who are going to figure it out, in the sense that Jim said the takeout, the delivery, we're not making money, we're just using that to pay the bills. There's going to be twists and changes to the business model one way or another, I believe, in some areas, which are going to make the food service industry look different going forward. I think that's typically what a disruption like this coronavirus, COVID-19, does to every industry.
And Larry, did you want to build on that at all, or echo or reinforce anything?
Yeah, I'm going to speak precautionary about online and takeout. I think online and takeout is helpful as an addition to your business, but not all restaurants are designed for online and for takeout. And a lot of restaurants are designed for the in-house experience. Outside of the cost to deliver and the packaging that's involved and the cost of the third-party delivery, the product doesn't always travel well, it doesn't necessarily give great brand representation, and it encourages people to stay at home and become couch potatoes forever. And I think that is something that we don't want to create as a model going forward. As humanity, we need social engagement. We need to get out and we need to shake hands with people eventually, and we need to be in proximity to people. That's just human nature. So I don't want people to think that building the online program is going to be the solution to the restaurant business. It's not profitable, and when you're living in a bricks and mortar environment, the expenses are high. You need bodies on site.
And I'm going to, as we move forward here and time slips by, I'm going to make an effort here to bundle some of the questions that are coming forward. And the next sort of category I'm looking at is around supply chains. So there's a question here about what is needed in order to help secure the supply chains. There's a question about that says, in terms of supply chains, how long will it take to stock up fridges, freezers, and dry inputs once the government gives you a green light to open? And there might be a few others here I'll pick up on as we discuss this, but in the world of supply chains, Fred, did you want to start with any sort of comments on that?
So that is probably one of the areas where I think, as a supplier, I like to call ourselves partners, but as a supplier to the food service industry, I think that's where we can definitely, and where we are willing to support our partners. So again, one of those areas where I would encourage everybody to identify things we can do to optimize things, to drive efficiency. Again, it's one of those things that I would throw in the basket of the innovators will come out of this stronger. I think this crisis is going to force us to think differently about all aspects of our industry, and we're more than happy to play our part to that. I don't have any specific examples here today, but I'm sure every operator can think about things that we can do better, more efficiently, that we can try and address with or without government intervention. But that's exactly the type of things that we want to hear from you guys as well.
Thank you. And Jim, would you like to add to that?
I think the biggest thing, and we've said to our operators now, we've been in the takeout and delivery business for a while. We don't want that isn't what our whole concept is. That's 10% of our business or 15% of our business at any given time. And what we want to do is switch back into being what we are, and that's a restaurant and a bar. We've asked our people to, we have a policy in our organization, you have to remodel every 7 years. What we've had is a downtime now for our people to upgrade equipment if they have to, or change something, paint the place, do some little things inside your restaurant, outside your restaurant, and you're getting ready for this time when we want you to come back to the restaurant. We don't want you, like Larry says, to be a couch potato. Well, that's not what our business is about. Our business is about entertainment. And to me, we want to entertain you back we want you to be a couch potato in our patio and in our restaurant. And that's exactly what we're working on. With the suppliers, we've had the fortunate piece that we have our own supply chain that we built through a company we have out of Edmonton that supplies with a lot of our product. And what we've looked at is saying, how can we do it better and faster? How can we make it so that our people are really ready to go when this happens? And that's the keys we have to have with our suppliers. I mean, we've got great relationships as hosts with his company and all the other companies we deal with. But I think all the operators, the single operators, the guys, 1 and 2 restaurants and stuff like that, have to get their restaurant ready to go. That's what my feeling is. And get your game plan there. Get your staff. You're going to have some retraining to do. I mean, just that alone, and these are going to be costs that we've got to figure out how to get from our provincial and our local governments.
Thanks, Jim. Larry, would you like to add anything on this supply chain point?
Yeah, I think I go back to my original pyramid, and I say again that the pyramid strength is important as we stand together. We need to look right now, right to the depths, down to the farmers, and see what is the necessity of the farmers right now to ensure that they are farming the product that we need, that they are developing the strength to ensure that when we reopen, that the products are available and that it doesn't become unobtainable and that the prices get out of hand because we have to import products. So I think right from the government and financial institutions right now, we need to look down to the farmers and the manufacturers and make sure that their needs are being met to ensure that they are stable when we're ready to open.
Great, thank you. And I'm just scrolling through the questions here. I'm going to try and group them into two more categories here. And it might be, these categories might be a bit strained, but we do have a question here, or some questions around, and Jim, I'm going to ask you first. So there is some questions here about how are you supporting the franchises? And that's tied into, and sorry here, I just want to see, there was a question versus sort of rural versus urban here, and if you think that'll, location will impact it at all. There's one other question, sorry, here, related to that, but I'll let you open, Jim, with sort of that support. Support that you're offering, and if you're seeing differences across the country based on locations or any sort of thoughts like that.
Well, first of all, we are not getting, as a Boston Pizza itself is not getting any franchise fees from our franchisees. Okay. So what we've done is we've said, right now you're not paying any franchise fees. We want you to survive. We've got to get you in that. We've taken away that plus the marketing budget right now. So we're sitting back and we're taking our game plan is dealing with our franchisees every week. We have FAC meetings every 2 weeks, which are Franchise Advisory Council every week or every 2 weeks. And then we have a national one where we have all our franchisees come on. And I think we've done 2 of those meetings and we're into our 3rd one coming up at the end of this month. So we're keeping everybody posted of what's going on. We're talking to our suppliers as well and doing the same thing with them, making sure they got a product to get to us when we can. And those are the things we can work on as a company. We listen to their concerns and they listen to what the concerns we have. Will we charge franchisees again? Absolutely, we have to. That's how we survive as an organization. But we can look at how we defer that down the road, the stuff that's being spent now. What we're looking at is making sure that our people are safe and the people that are working in the restaurant right now, and getting a game plan. They all want a game plan of how to open properly. So right now I'm reviewing a document and which is the opening plan, the menu, and how we're going to do it. Because remember, we could hand you a menu before and you looked at it and we wipe it down after because it's plasticized and we could wipe it down. That's gone. We have to give you a menu now that the minute you read it, we destroy it. Mm-hmm. You go look at all these things that we're doing that are changing how we operate, and paying for the bill, doing all these things. We're changing all that stuff as we're going. That's the cost coming out of our company. That's what we're doing.
Great, and I'm just, the additional question, I'm sorry I couldn't find it before, it was the question around, do you think smaller towns and mom and pop restaurants in these towns, how will they compare to the bigger cities and chains? Larry, if you wanted to say something and maybe build on that, and then I'll give it to Fred as well.
I think obviously each restaurant is designed and has different challenges in each area, but at the end of the day, I think we all have basic needs. I think it's absolutely crucial that everybody stands together and asks for the same things, because we have to be united in our plan to reopen and make sure it's successful. We are talking to our franchisees on Zoom calls. We are asking for input from all of our servers, bartenders, management to come to us with ideas and thought processes on how we create comfortable circumstances for the stores, for the safety of the staff, and for the comfort of the customers, obviously. So I agree that each area is different, and I think each area is going to need a different set of circumstances, but I believe overall, the position is that we all need a common goal of assistance to get us back to where we started.
Thanks, Larry. And Fred, what are you able to add to that? Is there anything you'd like to sort of say in that as well?
Yeah, maybe just, it's more a question than an answer, if I'm honest, but one of the things that we're observing is as markets are reopening, especially in the United States, as they're reopening the on-premise, there's assumptions at this point. I wouldn't say it's real insights, but there's assumptions that rural markets are much faster to get back to normal, including on-premise behaviors, than city markets. Now, that's the type of things that we're going to keep observing, trying to capture as facts and insights and share with our partners, because I think that could be a really, I mean, it could be a game changer in how you then dial up to 100% or ramp up these reopening plans after we're allowed to do that.
Yeah, and there's a whole, there is other questions here around international practice, how to deal with employees, but I'm also conscious of the time here, and what I'd like to do in this short time remaining is give each of our panelists, you know, if there's something that hasn't been addressed, that's something that you'd like to reinforce, to sort of have that opportunity in the first instance, and then I'm going to hand it to Perrin, because unfortunately we could spend hours on this. So Larry, I'll open the floor to you first.
I would just like to make a closing statement as follows. I would say this: on behalf of all of my colleagues and industry partners, we implore you, the Chamber of Commerce and Perrin too, to utilize the depth of your current and past relationships to urge the government to make the decisions necessary to ensure stability for the pyramid of prosperity. We need them to use their power of responsible, fair, and progressive thinking to create a blueprint that must reset the table for success. We can be pioneers, setting an example for other countries of how to save an industry that is crucial to the infrastructure of our local, provincial, and international communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. And Jim?
Yeah, I think the same thing as Larry's saying. We need increased liquidity and flexibility by financial institutes, including waiving of covenants and deferral of interest and principal payments. I think that's one of the biggest things in this business right now. And increased term allocation for long-term debt, because we're going to have some long-term debt against all the restaurants and bars and everything else there is. I mean, we need some allocation there that we got some time to pay all these things. And I think the next thing is that we have to make sure that we're prepared and what we're going to do as a company, it's whether in the small towns or the big towns or whatever, we're going to see closures no matter what. So you're going to be looking at some amalgamations of some companies as well. And I think you're going to see other people that are in a situation where, as we grow again, and we will grow and we will get better, we're going to be a different world for sure. So I think you got to be prepared for the new stuff that's coming.
Thank you, Jim. And Fred?
Couldn't agree more with what Larry and Jim said. From our end, we're definitely going to continue to play our part in amplifying those messages and asks from the food service industry to various levels of government. So that's my commitment to close this session this afternoon.
Wonderful, thank you. And I know I've been taking furious notes. Many of my colleagues here at the Chamber too, no doubt have. Perrin, I'm going to hand the floor back to you just to sort of make some closing and thank you remarks to close out the session today.
Leah, thank you. And let me thank our panel who are really outstanding. Fred, Larry, Jim, thank each of you. And Fred, thank you particularly for Molson Coors' support of this whole project, which is very important. I've learned a lot today from our experts, and certainly what I take out from it is that it reinforces so deeply to me the importance of the sector to our country and to our communities. I live in the city now in Ottawa, but the constituency I used to represent when I was in Parliament was small town and rural. If you were to take the restaurants out of those communities, not only would there be an enormous loss in terms of the economic livelihoods of people in those communities, but the quality of life in each of those communities would have suffered enormously. And that applies for large urban centers as well. So what we're looking at here is a sector whose problems are unique, who are hit harder and longer and faster than virtually any other sector in Canada, but a sector which is absolutely critical to us, both in terms of our economic strength and in terms of our quality of life. So I'm very grateful to each of you for participating today. We're looking forward to working with you to see how the Canadian Chamber can be helpful at any of the tables that we attend. And if we can help any of you in any way, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us.
Thank you, Perrin, and thank you, everyone, today, the panelists, and again, Molson Coors for sponsoring this event. It will be recorded, it will be shared, and we'll start talking about follow-up no sooner than we hit stop on the recording. So thank you to everyone this afternoon, and please stay safe and take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.